that we would just discard. Because there's a tension there. There is a tension for the Canadian Copt, or the British Canadian household, or the, are we going to do a Canadian, or are we going to do a British house, There's a tension there. But what is your culture? I remember having this conversation with my mom, and we got into a conversation, also it was around the same time, early in university, and my mom says, so what makes up your culture? So I said, I don't know, what makes up culture, Mom? What do you think? So we got talking, and maybe the music you listen to, the food that you eat, right? And then I was asking my mom, so then with all the things we named, what is your culture? And she said, well, the music I listen to, the food that I eat, the this and that. She said, my faith actually influences it all. Like the food that I eat depends on whether we're fasting or we're not fasting, The music I listen to depends on what season we're in, right? So these people that have been so deeply ingrained in the faith, honestly, it's almost like she was saying with St. Paul, my culture is not a culture of this world. It's not. My mom left. She left Egypt when she was 20 years old. So, them talking to her she's probably in her early 50s at the time when I was speaking with her. She'd lived more of her life in Canada than she had in Egypt. So it was a complicated question, but it's complicated even further by another culture, which is neither Egyptian nor Canadian, which influences all the stuff on that wheel, which is her faith. Maybe St. Paul would say, I am of a heavenly culture. Maybe we're over-spiritualizing it. I don't know. I actually don't know. Like Abuna said in his talk, I have more questions than I have answers. And I hope I'm not going to disparage you. I hope we're going to come out of this with some answers. Then add to that what Jesus says. He doesn't want us to be out of the world. He doesn't want us to be living in some kind of weird microculture. I mean, maybe if we're monastics, that would be fine. We're called out of the world. But he says in his final prayer, his final requests of the Father, I do not pray that you should take them out of the world. He doesn't want us out of the world. He wants us in the world. But sanctified by Him, sanctified by His Word. His Word is truth. In the world, but keep them from the evil one. So we're in the world. We've got some weird concoction culture, but then the world out there has their culture. The heck is their culture? My culture, their culture, my parents' culture. Oh my goodness. It's getting. Who was it that asked the question yesterday evening about what does it mean to evade superficial answers to complex questions? It's getting complex, hey? It's getting complex. Fortunately, we have giants who can inform us, give us great examples of what we can do, how we can approach cultures that might not be our own. Let's look at a case study of St. Paul in Athens in Acts 17. I had the whole text, but I'm gonna skip it for the sake of trying to be on time. Read it for yourself in Acts 17. St. Paul sees an altar to the unknown God. He goes to the Areopagus, the central place of discussion. He gets the floor for a few minutes, and you have to see with what mastery. Acts 17 is arguably, short of the Sermon on the Mount, the most eloquent sermon in all of Scripture. Far more eloquent than St. Peter's sermon early in the book of Acts, or anything in the Old Testament. So incredibly eloquent, but so perfectly crafted. Ask yourself, go back and read it today. If you have some time, if I can give you some homework, go and read it and ask yourself, what did St. Paul do knowing he was speaking to a bunch of Greeks, knowing he was speaking to a bunch of philosophers, knowing he was speaking to a bunch of people who thought that crucifixion was the ultimate shame. And if God had allowed Jesus to be so shamed, then he couldn't possibly be anyone of any importance. To the gods, anyways. Right? The gods. Polytheistic culture. He speaks against idolatry. He speaks against gods formed by the hands of men, but so eloquently, so carefully, not to turn them off. But he speaks the truth. He manages to say it. And what was the result of the sermon? At the very end, the last couple of verses, and when they heard of the resurrection of the dead, some mocked, while others said, "We will hear you again on this matter." Some are going to mock, guaranteed, but some aren't. Some aren't. And I'll talk a lot more about this tomorrow, but what we've learned in just a few years of serving in this area is it's all about the long game. You know, I'm not Billy Graham, for those for or against or whatever, but I'm not gonna preach a sermon everybody's gonna fall over and repent and change their lives and change the course of their life and carry on that way forever. I don't know. Maybe the Holy Spirit can do whatever he wants to do, and he is fantastic. But he ain't sure never done that with me yet. Maybe today, but but what I have seen is the long game. You know? Day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year. The Holy Spirit softening the hearts of others and mine, and changing me. And that's what I've seen in my own life. So it seems to be in character for him. When you look at St. Paul, he's playing the long game with them. When you look at what St. Paul did, he compliments them first. He starts off by, he says to them, men of Athens, I notice in all things that you are very religious. He starts off by saying, to them that was a big compliment. And then he places the gospel in their cultural context. I noticed you have an altar to the unknown God. He doesn't start by talking to them about something which is foreign to them. He starts by talking. He gives them, somebody was telling us about the sandwich technique earlier, right? He starts off by complimenting them. Then he starts with them where they're at. Then he knows that they're keenly interested in the origin of things. A lot of Greek philosophy is about the origin of things and like creationism and all that kind of stuff. So he frames the gospel from there. So as a society today, as a culture in North America today, if it was one thing, if you had to say one thing, what is the one thing that people care about the most? Maybe we should start framing our gospel from there. Because Jesus talked about everything. Jesus talked about money, Jesus talked about sex, Jesus talked about success, Jesus talked about poverty, Jesus talked about family, Jesus talked about children, Jesus talked about everything. So we can start with people. I'm not saying to the exclusion of the rest of the gospel, only talk to people about what they want to hear about. No, I'm not saying that. But just start with them with what they care about. And then you can go from there. And then he boldly proclaims the gospel. He quotes their prophets. Early in our experience, we realize that it doesn't make sense to prove anything to anyone using sources that they don't consider credible. There are beautiful verses in the Quran that give credence to Jesus. But if you don't believe the Quran to be credible, for whatever reasons you may or may not believe that, then it's just interesting. You're interested in Jesus, you're interested in what other people have to say about Jesus, so it's interesting, but it's not credible. So what do people consider credible? Use that. I do so much of that sometimes when I go speak in other audiences that are predominantly Coptic Orthodox, such as this, I have to shift gears. I find that I've got like 4 quotes by Gandhi and like 6 by Margaret Thatcher and by all these people, right, that may or may not have been Christian, right, but they're actually speaking the truth of Christ, and I can tell you where. But I've gotten so used to not giving chapter and verse. I tell you, the easiest thing to do is just don't give people the reference. Just walk around saying the stuff that Jesus says, which is so jam-packed with truth, and most people would never deny it, and just don't give Jesus credit. Not because you're like plagiarizing Jesus. No, because you know that the word Jesus is offensive. At work in Toronto, you cannot say the word Jesus. You might be able to say God and keep your job. Like you could say, somebody says something, you could say thank you. You might be able to get away with thank God. But if you start thanking Jesus, HR will be giving you a call, right? It's funny. And I'm not saying to hide Jesus, but you know what? St. Paul in Acts 17 doesn't mention the name Jesus, not once. Pretty radical, eh? It's pretty radical. Preach the gospel, but don't mention the name Jesus. He says, and he will return. Let me just pull up the verse instead of I didn't want to spend way too much time on this, but truly these times of ignorance God has overlooked, but now commands all men everywhere to repent, because he has appointed the day in which he will judge the world in righteousness by the man whom he has ordained. He has given assurance to this by raising him from the dead. Never mentions the name Jesus. That's pretty radical. That is pretty radical. St. Paul did it. I'm not telling you to be afraid to mention the name Jesus. If this is out of fear, we all agreed yesterday, fear, isolation, this morning, fear, isolation, all that. I'm not doing none of that, right? I'm going to get my head chopped off, I'm going to get my head chopped off. Doesn't matter. I'm going to lose my job, I'm going to lose my job. I'm not doing this out of fear. And of course, above all things, the heart of man is very deceitful, and maybe I'm not calling it right? But at least consciously, I'm not going to conceal the name of Christ out of fear. What was the result? We talked about that. Let's move on to something else. We mentioned a little bit earlier Acts 15, the First Council of Jerusalem. St. James, arguably one of the most traditional and conservative and elder of the apostles, stands up, and after having heard what St. Peter has to say and heard what the antagonists had to say at the time, says, "Therefore I judge that we should not trouble those from among the Gentiles who are turning to God." What are we doing in our churches? So at that conference I was telling you about earlier, let me phrase this differently. The one here with the bishops that we had here in 2013, one of the priests was tasked with answering the question, how can we make the faith of the Coptic Orthodox Church more attractive? That's what was given. We were all assigned something, okay, to speak on. So he was assigned to speak on that. And he was bold enough to say, Your Graces, my dear Reverend Fathers, I hope no one will take offense if I try to rephrase the question. I don't believe there's anything that we could ever possibly do to make the faith of the Coptic Orthodox Church more beautiful than it actually is. I think there's a whole lot of things we have to stop doing that obscure, that hide that beauty. We're not going to change the church. We're just going to take all the annoying things that we do that make it hard for people to interact with that beauty. We're just going to, let's take those out of the way. Let's take the obstacles out of the way. Let's stop troubling the people who want to walk in through the front door. I promise you, we don't do a lot of evangelism at SMSK. We don't do a lot of street evangelism and going out and talking to people. You know why? Because God is sending us more people through the front door than we know what to do with. No, but I'm saying this, forgive me, I'm saying this to our detriment, okay? God is sending us, listen to me, more people, we don't know what to do with them. Let me be more blunt, okay? we all kind of have a capacity in our heart to love people. Like, I have room in my heart to love 4 people, 6 people, 3 people. Suffering enlarges that quantity. That's a topic for a different day. So all these people are coming in through the front door, but I couldn't be bothered to change the way that I do things that make me comfortable and are convenient to me to accommodate that person. Like, there's so many people coming in through the front door, we're not able to get out. We're not able to get out the door. But they walk in the front door and they just walk right out the back door. 90% of first-time guests in an American church visit once. What's wrong with that? That's a general church statistic, not a Coptic Orthodox statistic, but I don't know if it's either in Coptic churches or not. What's wrong with that number? We don't need, like, there's a lot of literature out there about like Christian marketing, like, not marketing, like, we're not marketing Jesus, we're not selling Jesus, but like how to get the word out there that we're doing this ministry, we're doing this thing. There's a certain group of people of which I align myself with that is saying we don't need to do marketing. We have the opposite problem that most businesses have. We're not having trouble attracting people. We don't know what to do with them once they arrive, or couldn't care less. It's a problem. It's a really big problem. The gospel message is often offensive. I am a sinner in need of forgiveness. I am dead in need of resurrection. A lot of people find that offensive. Walk up to somebody and say, you know, you're dead. You're not dead. You're so dead. You're dead. You're rotting. You are corrupt. Eek! It's offensive. It's offensive. It is. The gospel is offensive, can be offensive enough as it is. It doesn't need my bad breath to make it more offensive. There are little things that we can do that can make that the gospel doesn't need to be preached with bad breath. The gospel does not need to be preached in a way that is overtly offensive to the audience. What are the obstacles we're putting in people's way that we can remove? All of that is going to be answered with culture. Another verse for you, okay? Another like this is critical. We then who are strong ought to bear with the scruples of the weak and not to please ourselves. To put it in plainer English, sometimes it's easier to look at other translations or paraphrases of Scripture. Now, the Message is not a translation of Scripture, it's a paraphrase. So don't take the words here word for word, okay? But they certainly bring the meaning to life in a way that might be easier for us to interact with. Those of us who are strong and able in the faith need to step in and lend a hand to those who falter. And not just to do what is most convenient to us. Strength is for service, not status. Insert Mark 10. Even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. End of parentheses. Even the Son of Man. How much more me? Strength is for service, not status. Each one of us needs to look after the good of the people around us, asking ourselves, how can I help? How can I help? How can every single one of you walk out of this conference more in communion with Christ than before you walked in? That's my business. That's my business. Am I a servant or am I a master? Was I ordained to the priesthood so I could be your master or so I could be your servant? Strength is for service, not for status. Are we ready to serve? I get to speak a lot at a neighboring parish of ours that is a traditional Coptic Orthodox church, very large, very, very large traditional Coptic Orthodox church. I go to their university meetings so often, I've become like one of their servants practically, you know. I'm there, there was a season that I was there like literally almost every second or third week. Now less so, but nonetheless, right? I used to learn Arabic jokes on my way. I'd call up my friends who are a lot more Egyptian than me, and I would learn Arabic jokes in the car on my way over there, so I could relate. So I could relate to the youth that just have been in Canada for a year or two, and and my Arabic isn't that great, and so on. I don't read and write Arabic, right? And I promise you, if I was ordained to a church which is predominantly immigrant, I'll learn Arabic. If the Pope decides to move me to Sweden, I'll learn Swedish. Or I sure to God hope I would. Did you know the gospel was originally written in Greek? By people who didn't know how to read or write Greek? In all likelihood, St. Matthew did not know Greek. St. Mark might have. He was wealthy. St. Luke certainly. His father was Greek. St. John, improbable. Why did they write it in Greek? Because it was the universal language of the time. For evangelism. They didn't write the gospel for themselves. They're writing the gospel. They know what's in it. They didn't need to write it in Aramaic. They wrote it in the language of the people that they were writing it to. Are you and I ready to do that? Are we willing to do that? What is your culture? You know what? Scrap that. Who cares? Who cares what my culture is? What's the culture of the guy who's walking in through the front door? Who cares what my culture is? Who of us are ready, show of hands, who of us are ready to say, I don't care what my culture is? Part of being able to adapt to other cultures, Abuna was telling us, was knowing your own culture. So it is an important part of the question. But what I'm getting at is, who of us is ready to say, you know what? If all the youth in this church only speak Arabic and they're lost and they don't know Jesus, I will learn Arabic. Sure, why not? Who cares? It's a language. It's a language that can give life to someone. I'll learn it, doesn't matter. When we look at the differences in cultures, here's a quick win, okay? Western culture is very cerebral. Western culture sort of happens above the ears, okay? You'll notice that in Western culture, people are very concerned about understanding. They want to understand. They want to know. They have questions. They have rational questions that require rational answers. And those rational answers are probably going to be followed up with follow-up questions that you're going to need to answer. And for the Western mind, they know that since they're going to ask you a question with a follow-up question and a follow-up question to the follow-up question, a follow-up question, a follow-up question, a follow-up question, they know that they're gonna eventually you're gonna get stumped. So they're not expecting you to know the answer to everything. They're just expecting you to be honest. And like Basil was telling you, just to say, I don't know when you don't know, and say, I'll look it up. And they're going to keep asking questions until you say that. Not because they want to stump you, but because they're curious. And their experience, the depth of their experience happens, and now I know when I'm saying Western and Eastern, we're like painting an enormous amount of people with one paintbrush. And no one is actually Western, and no one is actually Eastern, but we're kind of like, we're using like hyperbole to kind of like take extremes so that we can make points clear, right? But if they stop asking you questions, that means they've lost interest, right? Whereas in Eastern culture, authority and respect to authority is what demonstrates respect, not depth of curiosity. So if Abuna says something to me, and I ask a question, and he answers it, and I ask him another question, now this looks like I'm going back and forth with him here. I'm trying to prove him wrong. Now that's disrespectful. It's very different, right? why? Well, because the Eastern experience happens largely below the ears. Now, I'm not saying that Easterners don't think, but the Eastern experience is very experiential. I want to taste, I want to smell, I want to, and when you go to, it's awesome visiting the Holy Land. You walk, most churches there are either Eastern Orthodox, mostly Greek, or Roman Catholic, mostly Franciscan, right? You walk into, you can see the difference in culture. It's obvious, and you can see why Rome and Constantinople were just never going to see eye to eye, because they're like from different worlds. They might as well be from different planets, right? You can eat off the floor in the Roman Catholic churches, right? But you think you're in a library or a museum. It's dead quiet. And like if you cough or sneeze or anything or whisper something to the person next to you, everyone will hear, right? And there's people in there. They're just quiet. Everybody's quiet. That's how they show respect. I remember we walked into the Church of the Annunciation, the Greek Orthodox Church of the Annunciation in Nazareth, right? And there's like a dozen different groups all singing veneration hymns in different areas, right? And the priest is doing Vespers, and he's going around with the censer, and there's people who are literally in Vespers singing their own veneration hymn in their own language to Saint whoever, and it's like chaos, right? And there's stuff to smell, and there's stuff to see, and there's candles, and there's beeswax, and there's, right? And so then to the Latin person, it would be like sensorium overload, you know what I mean? Like they would, they're right? They're all of their senses would just go berserk, right? But then the Easterner walks into the Roman Catholic Church, and they feel like it's sterile. It's like a laboratory or something. It's beautiful, it's stone, and it's gray. Dead. Where's the life? It's just different. It's not good, it's not bad. It's like what Buddha told us. We have to stop criticizing and trying to decide. Oftentimes I'm trying to decide, well, which is better? Well, which do I like more? Stop, John. This is beautiful. What is beautiful in this? What is beautiful in that? And carry on your little Holy Land journey, right? And just carry on. They're different. Western is very different from Eastern, and their experience is going to be different. And now we live in this cross-cultural kind of environment. Add to that, we live in a post-Christian culture. What does that mean? That means I've been there, done that, got the t-shirt. Thank you very much. Remember those good old days where you visit a place and you get a t-shirt? I don't know if I'm dating myself, nobody does that anymore, but I have t-shirts of various different places that we went as kids, right? So Christianity was this thing, it kind of came and went, and we're done with that. Says culture. You don't believe me? I'll show you some statistics in a minute, but evidenced by biblical illiteracy. But biblical illiteracy rife with misinformation. How many times do you meet somebody who thinks they know what the Bible says, but what they're telling you with complete conviction can be found nowhere in the Bible, right? With a little bit of kindness and a little bit of gentleness, without being without getting into a head-to-head, that's very interesting. Tell me more about that. Oh, where do you think you can find that in the Bible? Why don't we Google it? Let's see what Google has to say about this, right? Where we found. I guess Google hasn't read the Bible either, right? Maybe he hasn't read your Bible. Right? People walk up to you and say, how can you believe in a God that ... Most often, my answer is going to be something along the lines of, oh, how could anybody believe in that? I don't believe in that either. Right? But the idea that society has this idea that they know what the faith says. But where did they get that idea? They got it from somewhere. Because people aren't bad. They got it from somewhere. Where did they get it from? Right? So, I don't know if it displays yet. It's large enough. Which of the following describe the Bible? They asked this question on a survey here in America. 52% of Americans say it's a good source of morals. 38% say it's historically accurate. 37% say it's helpful today. 36% say the Bible is true. 35% say it's life-changing. These 30% are like 1/3. Like that's low. Okay, forget about the Bible. What about church attendance? What is church attendance like in post-Christian culture? Well, I would say that attending church is acceptable. 65%, two-thirds would say it's admirable. 60% would say it's common, and so on. 27%, quarter, would say it's outdated. That's yesterday. Who goes to church anymore? Okay, forget about church. I'm not spiritual, I'm not religious, I'm spiritual, right? It's a whole topic for another day, what that means and so on. This is some Canadian data because we're very much more into that kind of thing. Is religion positive or negative? Well, it depends on who you ask. If you ask non-believers, 69% of them say that religion is negative. Only 2% of them say it's positive, and the rest refrain from answering. The spiritually uncertain, 43% of them say it's negative. Those who are faithful in private, whoa, the numbers increase a lot. Only 18% of them say it's negative. 30% of them say it's positive. The other 50% refrain from answering. Those who are religiously committed, 2/3 of them say it's positive, but still 11% of them. They are religiously committed, but they think religion is a bad thing. I'm not commenting on whether this is good or this is bad, and I'm trying not to be sarcastic or I'm just saying, like we agreed, we're not gonna attach labels, value statements to culture. We're just gonna say, what culture are we living in? That's the question we're trying to answer. Well, this is part of the answer. Anyways, I have a lot more statistics for you, but it doesn't really, I want to kind of keep rolling here, right? But when you ask about religious affiliation, right, there's a whole huge group who have appeared out of nowhere, it would seem. And they are called the nuns. The nuns, they're not nuns in a convent. They're what religion do you align yourself with? What worldview, what do you align yourself with? They check none. Atheist is on there, agnostic is on there, but they still check none. I don't know if I'm an agnostic. You see, theists believe that there is a God. Atheists believe that there is no God. Agnostics believe that the question doesn't matter. So, and everybody accepts that everybody believes something. But the nuns, they don't know what they believe. I don't know that I can say the question doesn't matter. It seems to matter a lot to the Christians. They think I'm going to hell, right? And the atheists think that I'd be, wasting my life, and seem to only get one, right? And I'd be wasting it following some weird, antiquated instrument of controlling populations. And so I don't know. I just haven't really thought about it, and so I don't know. I guess it probably is really important. So there's a great book called The Rise of the Nuns. Talks all about this. Right? Here's another big difference. People in society today, not necessarily in the Coptic Church or not in the Coptic Church or whatever, but just in society in general, don't tithe as regularly as they used to. This isn't about money. I don't care about money. Those who know me well, I never talk about money. But it's just an interesting difference. They don't tithe regularly. They're still very generous. They give to the things that touch them. And they give generously. Very generously. They open their wallets and dump everything inside. But they don't do it on the 2nd of every month in a systematic fashion. They hear a sermon here, it really touches them, boom, give. They see a need there, with starving children, boom, give. Right? They're still very generous. But it's not on the 2nd of every month. It's different. It's just different. All of this is going to require some emotional intelligence. What is that? Oh my goodness, we could go off on another tangent with that. But we won't. And maybe some cultural sensitivity. Being willing to engage people in conversation and look at these different cultures, right? So now I want to hear a little bit from you. I want to hear from you. What would you say is the culture of the people you wish to share the gospel with? And if you wish, you can use the different kind of things that include, inform culture to kind of describe what is the culture of the people that you wish to share the gospel with. What language do they speak? What food do they eat? What arts do they appreciate? And so on. You tell me.
There's 1.6 billion of those, and you alluded to it. They are the Muslims. We are Muslims. I won't forget last whole conference there was this lady. She was one of the older ones, and she was Egyptian. And she said, we have to remember something. We were doing an exercise, and she said, we have to remember something. We're coming from a culture where we were barred from evangelizing. At some point, we were talking about we have to, we're talking about North America. But there are Muslims that come to North America. We are very close to their culture. We were part of it. We respect a lot of their culture. And I think these are the closest, these are the easiest to approach.
But I want us to get like that. There's a promise that we would get specific. I want to get real specific, okay? I want you to tell me the people, think of a couple of people you would like to share the gospel with, okay? And then answer this question. What food do they eat? What food is normal for them to eat? What music do they listen to? What art do they appreciate? What traditions and rituals does that? Think of a couple of people, and you don't have to tell us their names. It wouldn't be relevant anyways. Just tell us what. Let's put some specific words to the culture of the person out there that we want to share the gospel.
I think for me, a lot of the people that I grew up with or are surrounded by value education, value feeling enlightened and intellectual, and value independence and not conforming.
Autonomy, maybe?
Sure. And I think, to me, I think it's the bumper sticker says tolerance. Mm-hmm. That, I think, unfortunately, Christians are not viewed as a culture or a belief system that a lot of people are willing to tolerate anymore. And they might tolerate something that seems to be really, could seem very extreme. So I think a huge part of what we need to do is recognize that we have to share Jesus' love and remember that we are all sinners and be open to being vulnerable, so that we come across as not judgmental and loving and truly wanting to save as many people as possible and share this amazing good news with people. Because I think we're combating people viewing us as, well, you are subjecting yourself to a patriarch and you're silly or not intellectual for believing this. And that we're viewed as not being accepting, which is, God willing, not the case.
We want at least 4 more answers. Specific things. Think of specific people. Tell me specific things that you think they hold dear in these different areas. What language do they speak? What food do they consume?
Not specifically, but I see that sometimes when you say, or people can assume that you are a committed Christian, committed to your religion, they just get negative feelings towards you. even though they are not specific, but they are numerous. And I also get surprised that sometimes the same people, they speak good about Islam, which is with no discussion to other religions, but why they would have a bad idea about me as a Christian, but they would have good impression about a religion that they don't know much about. And these people, even though they are not specific, but I really want to reach to these people and tell them, yes, we are good.
These are excellent comments, but I sorry, they didn't answer the question that I asked. In an effort to kind of, I know we all have a lot to say on the topic in general, but I'm trying to answer a specific question. And until we start to answer this question about what specifically is the culture, because the next question I'm going to ask is, what are you going to do about that? You know? They don't eat makarona bechamel and wara anab. So the answer is, they think it's weird that you eat these little green rolled things. So stop serving them. They're a delicacy to you. You know how much hours and blood and sweat and tears went into them, you know, because your tita constantly tells you, but they don't know and they don't care and they don't want to eat them, you know, right? 90% of my church now comes up. We don't distribute the blessing bread and the eulogea and anyways, but 90% of them, when I come to give them the, you know, like a piece of bourbon, they're like, oh, sorry, Bourbon, thank you, Tony. That's the microculture of our church. Like everybody wants, like no one wants to say no, no one wants to appear as like ungrateful, but at the same time, everybody has like a limited number of grams of carbs they're allowed in a day. Hey man, I respect that. Hey, the struggle is real, you know, right? The struggle is real. Like I get you, you know, here you go, here's your crumb. You know, that's the culture. So I just gotta stop breaking off like thirds, you know? Right? Hey, would you like a third or a half? And the guy's gonna be horrified. He's like, that's the number of carbs I get for the rest of the week. You know? Right? That's the culture. What food do they eat? It's very specific. You tell me. Think of a couple of people and tell me specific things.
I have a specific coworker who regards herself as a very devout Protestant. She goes to a church, we have a church in Virginia called McLean Bible Church, huge mega church, and we start talking about, you know, what her focus is on going to church, and it's pretty much centered around praise and worship. That really, when it comes to the arts, that is her big thing. The times that we've broached the topics of values like a premarital relationship, premarital sex, so on and so forth, that has nothing to do with her religion, because you know, all the verses about St. Paul that talk about, you know, fornication and such, those don't apply to her because she believes in God, so she knows she's going to be saved. So that's probably a pretty popular line of thought.
And we all agreed, and I'm so grateful to you all that we're not gonna, even if something is against her, we're not gonna, you know, be like, this is an elementary school, right? We're not gonna laugh or make fun or, you know. Great, thank you very much. There was a comment up here at the front. Sir, can you give me one? Wait. Okay. Who else?
So I have a friend, I guess I'll go through the circle real quick. Values, I think he values family very much. He values education and work, greater community. He belongs to the Indian community. He was from India. Language, primarily English now, but he also speaks his home language. Traditions and rituals, he kind of abandoned a lot of his family traditions, like the Hindu religion and so on. He stopped doing that. Techniques and skills, he's an engineer, works with me. Food, he likes eating all sorts of food. He asked me a lot of questions about what I believe in, and he's interested on how tolerant is the church to homosexuality. He hasn't clearly said to me that he is homosexual, but he asks a lot of questions that hint at whether we are tolerant to that or not. He likes to talk about abortion, gun laws, things like that. I think he is he's seeking something, but he's trying to fill all his gaps and voids by just working a lot and traveling for fun.
Probably generalizes to a few examples of friends and others that I know. So kind of what, and I'm thinking of the difficult topics, but that's one of them. So I have coworkers that strongly believe in same-sex marriage, whether they're actually homosexual or they just believe that it's the right of equality for others and supporting them in parades or anything like that. That is something that it's a right that we shouldn't deny others. From food, so questions I would get, for example, is like, why can't you eat this? God says, like, why are there restrictions on you on certain days and certain things you can't eat? It seems like it's controlling. Like that's that feel they get when they see that from me. Values from their side, family, and I think, and I kind of give you their side as well as how I believe they see from when they experience, whether it's me or others, but I feel like they recognize that family is a strong value in the Coptic Church, and that's something that I've been told, like that's something they admired and on their side as well. From languages, varies, Spanish, English. Arts, I think maybe I should say music, so listen to whatever the hip hop music or worldly music that can be categorized. People can put a secular quotes around it. And from the religions or beliefs, some are Seventh-day Adventists, Protestants, or others that fit into the spiritual category that do pray, do believe in God in times of difficulty, but not necessarily active participant in church. Some question the purpose of the church. I can pray at home. I can have a personal relationship with God. So those are probably some of the tougher topics, I think, at least for me.
So there are a group of moms at my children's school. So we're in Zambia, but my kids go to a school that's international. So there's a lot of expats and a large expat community there. And so I have like a mom's group. Some of the moms in that group are Hindu, and there's actually quite a large population of Hindu. And so we all have like this mom group, and we cook different foods from different cultures, and on Thursdays we meet together and eat them, and we kind of find a lot of things in common. Like they're all vegetarian, so some are vegetarian. So I'm glad I don't cook Egyptian food, so I know a lot of vegetarian, vegan food. So that's kind of a bonding thing that we have together, that they can try some of different recipes, more Western style, and I get to try some of their delicious Indian food. And family, of course, their values are big on family and things like that. They love a lot of music and arts and dances and things like that. And so I think also one thing is that the Hindu cult, like the Hindu religion, I think they're more accepting of everyone. Like they don't really have a right or wrong. So they I feel like God's kind of been putting on my heart lately to kind of take that next step in our friendships too, like how to start actually, they know I'm different, but can I actually talk about it? And this is where boldness comes in. It's a lot easier actually to talk to Zambians and Africans than it is to, So one thing I did notice from one of my Hindu friends is that she was talking to me, and we have another friend that's very, very devout Christian. And so when she talks, like even the words she says, like there's a special Christian lingo she uses, and it goes right over my head too. Like she's just really different. And so one of my Hindu friends commented that it's always going over her head. But then she did comment that she knows, like for example, I don't know if she's listening to the sermons we post, because she was like, yeah, but your husband's, I understand him. So like there's something there in simplicity and simple messages and simple things like that.
Yeah, tomorrow I'll probably talk a whole lot about Christianese, this weird language that we speak at church that no one speaks anywhere else in the world.
So a lot of my co-workers are we're kind of like London specifically is very diverse. Where everyone's coming. We're a melting pot of many multiple cultures. But I suppose like the flavour, the British flavour is very like kind of individualistic. The idea of family is very distorted. Actually, a lot of people sometimes are being kicked out of their homes from 16 or told to pay rent to their parents. Like it's a very, their family identity is very different. So there's no stability there. Language is English, but again, as I said, they're so diverse. So people kind of have some heritage, but the language is fully English. And I think that they are still seeking though a community, because most people are, especially a lot of them are very lonely. Like they're desperate for a sense of belonging. Actually, even though everyone's meant to be individual, there's still this deep longing to be part of something and to be welcomed and to be accepted. Very respectful of people's boundaries, so they don't overstep, they don't push. Like obviously sometimes when I used to bring back treats from my travels, I would go obviously Egyptian style and just buy 10 billion things and overly, and I was thinking I'm being back, sometimes that could be considered like you're kind of mothering them, and you've got to kind of just take a step back and just meet them where they're at. But they're still very appreciative of anything that is offered, so not do it. But so.
Say it. Of course.
I understand correctly what we're trying to describe the characteristics on this wheel of different people. So I have one person that I grew up with in my mind, to try to put in perspective. Yeah, this is like many things from our culture. So in the arts, he listened to hip hop and rap. Food and drink, it wasn't necessarily that we would eat from his family. We might get food like from outside just for the night. Maybe mom's not cooking every single night. Values, education, and success are very important. Greater community. One of them's parents were divorced, although the culture that they came from was a Spanish culture, so they valued very much family. So that's a very difficult point in their life. Language, English and Spanish. Another one was German. Traditions and rituals. I remember every year they would have a Halloween party at their house. That was what I knew that they were going to have. So, techniques and skills. I know at one point he was working as a cartoon artist, and tools and objects that are very connected to the internet and all the gadgets. No longer not reading books, never grew up reading books, and considering that as something that's unneeded. Playing video games, so to reach out to their mindset from that upgrade.
Thank you very much, Sayyidina. Thank you for everybody who participated, and I'll share something with you, and maybe most of you are familiar with it, or maybe you're not. A book called How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. I'm moving out for the first time in my life, and my dad hands me this book and says, "Here, you might find this useful." And I look at it, How to Win Friends and Influence People. I'm like, "Dad, are you trying to tell me something like are you trying to tell me I'm not a very friendly person?" He laughs. He says, "No, but you might find a lot of truth here," and I certainly did. And I think it's chapter 3. Dale Carnegie talks about being interested in other people, and the easiest way to make other people think that you're interesting is to take interest in their interests. So Sayyidina is obviously an avid reader and may or may not know very much about video games. If he wants to connect, if Sayyidina wants to, if His Grace wants to connect with this guy, maybe he's got to stop by a video game shop. We do this dinner for a marginalized community not far from our church every Sunday. And I used to go every single Sunday. And after church on Sunday, I would always pick up a newspaper and flip through it as fast as I could on my way from church to the dinner, because I needed to have something to talk about over dinner with these people. And they were very, very acutely aware of everything that was happening in the city because it affected them drastically. If the cost of public transportation went up 10 cents, man, they had a lot to say about that, right? And I'd look like I wasn't interested in the things that they were interested in. I know it sounds obvious, but you want people to think you're interesting? Be interested in what they're interested in because they find that stuff interesting. So if you have something to say about something they're already interested in, they're going to think you're interesting. It's not complicated. It's not complicated. It's easy. But it just takes a little bit of forethought. And you can use this wheel or you can use whatever. Like what we said yesterday, it's important that it comes from our hearts. I want to wrap up. I want to wrap up and say that what Abuna told us this morning, and I didn't repeat it, is just of primal importance. I must be committed to unity. I must be committed that every branch that can get grafted into the body of Christ has got to get grafted in. I must be committed. I must be committed to that person. He has a name, she has a name, who's standing at the threshold of the church, not sure whether they should walk in or not. And if somebody walked up to me, had been attending church at our church for a couple of weeks, I hope I knew the wrong thing. His Grace can correct me if I did. Walked up to me and said, those of you who haven't been to SSK, I love incense. Like 3 minutes into raising of incense, there's clouds of incense. You could put your hand 5 inches from your nose, you wouldn't be able to know how many fingers are there, okay? Right? And she walks up to me afterwards and said, Father John, it sounded like a beautiful service, but I kind of missed most of it. I'm like, oh, how come? She goes, well, I don't know, like there's something about the incense, just like, I don't know, like I felt like I was going to choke or something. So like I begged her to come next week, and next week, like, there's one point where we're supposed to put 5 spoonfuls of incense, right? So I was counting the grains. 1 grain, 2 grains, grains of sand, right? I didn't change the liturgy, but does it have to be clouds of incense? Do you have to not be able to see? People in our church don't know whether the men and the women stand on the same side or different sides because nobody can see anybody anyways. Right? Does it have to be that way? It doesn't. It doesn't say that anywhere in the books. No one taught me that in the monastery. Right? I just feel that the incense is the prayers of the saints. I want the church to be full of the prayers of the saints, so full of incense smoke. Right? But if it means this woman's gonna have to look for salvation somewhere else, then no. No, we'll figure something out. We'll make her a ventilated glass box or something. I don't know. We'll figure it out. We will figure it out for you. We're committed to not putting obstacles in the way of those who are coming to the faith. If we're not going to be committed to these 3 things, I don't know what. And if we are committed to these 3 things, and we come up with some model and some plan for all the churches to follow, or not all the churches to follow, whatever, but we're committed to these 3 things, and we have a plan or we don't have a plan, I'm pretty sure we're going to do pretty well. God, people, that He sends to us through our front doors. I have sinned, forgive me.